Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now, that YouTube channel that likes to get down in detail with our favorite crime writers or crime writers we've never met before or crime writers it's been a while since we had a chat with them. You just know that on this channel you'll get a chance to sit down, grab a cuppa, take a time to just be here for our discussions around authors' latest work or projects that they're involved with. And as many of you know who tune in, when the Doctor can welcome back an author who has always seemed to have been there throughout the journey, then it's wonderful. It's like welcoming a family member back in to have a chat. William Shaw, how lovely that we can do this. Thank you so much for being here.
That is such a nice introduction. Yeah, it's lovely. It is nice to be back. Thank you very much for having me, Jackie.
I just, I think back over, where we've done events in bookstores and in festivals, and we've met online. And I don't know whether, there's a meeting of minds, there's a shared, that commonality, or just, well, and I think it's this, I just think you're such a wonderful person to talk to because you have such insights as well. I think not only is your writing, it's a belter, the way that you tell a story. I noticed in the blurb for the latest book we're going to talk about, none other than Peter May said that you're a superb storyteller.
That's a great honor.
And I would absolutely concur with him that I think whatever you focus on, whether you write in as William Shaw or in the case of the standalones and the thriller books, G.W. Shaw, they're the kinds of books that you just get lost in. It's like, oh, is that the time? Oh, I need, because it's like just one more page, because it's a story, that you want to find out that what is happening. So yeah, I totally agree, and thank you for being that storyteller. I wonder for people that aren't familiar with you, and I can call you William, can't I? Not GW.
Definitely. Nobody calls me G, or George is the first name.
Yeah. George is the first name.
Yeah, great. Nobody calls me it ever.
Could you give us a brief summary, if that's possible, between that idea of, because you have a series.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you could just tell us a little bit about that series, and then this idea of, you've been writing now standalone thrillers, and what the series and the standalones give to you as an author.
Well, my first love was kind of detective fiction, because I think detective fiction is just an amazing form that tells you so much about the world around you, because detectives have to investigate the world, and I love it as a form. I just think it's a really interesting, constantly moving forward thing about looking at the real world as it is, and quite small bits of it, and it allows you to look at all bits of society. But I've been doing lots of events with a lot of colleagues, especially women colleagues, and they were really interested in locked room mysteries, which are a kind of different thing, the Agatha Christie era, which were kind of like some of the detective novels as well, but it's a very different type of detective fiction. It's about, you put yourself in a nice place, a situation, a country house or a liner or something like that, and then you have this idea of who did it, and it's a puzzle. And they were doing those because they'd enjoyed them as reading them as children, but they wanted to find a way that wasn't stuck in the 1930s with all the class, race, a different Britain, sort of things like that, to find a way that they could reflect on the modern world. And obviously Richard Osman unlocked that hugely by doing that and making it about old people and stuff like that. A lot of people say, oh, he just barged in doing this stuff, but if you look, his books are actually quite interesting because they're doing a new bit around that locked room. And Ellie Griffiths does a new bit around mixed society and the locked room sort of thing. They're not really strictly locked rooms, but they're small casts, and that one of them has done it. And she talked a lot to me about how she'd read those books as a child. She wanted, and she was always being asked to speak about Christie and stuff like that. But so what would you be doing if you were that person now?
You would, yeah.
And I was thinking, well, that's interesting, because I never read those books as a child. And it may have been because I was a bloke and blokes read different things. But I was growing up in the 70s, and my sort of I was a teenager in my 70s. I read Alistair MacLean, Hammond Innes, Desmond Bagley, Neville Shute, who was
Yeah.
exceptional, Mary Stewart, people like that, and they were adventures. And in the 70s, of course, we didn't have much foreign travel. It was a bit of an exotic thing. You were really lucky if you went away on a holiday to Spain.
Yeah, totally. I
But these
remember
thriller, yeah, completely, wasn't it? It was a very different
Oh
thing,
yeah.
taking your holidays in Thailand or something. But these thrillers took us there. And what they did is they expanded the world for us, because the world was, if you think about all those thrillers written there, they weren't the sort of thrillers these days go to dark places. They take you to the dark corridors of Washington or Moscow, and they're quite dark. Whereas the thrillers in the 70s were actually quite sunlit. Or even if you went to Ice Station Zabri, you're going to an exotic location, and they took you to the Alps, and you had adventure, and they were kind of like, definitely male adventures. But the interesting thing is they were romances as well. And I thought this was a really interesting thing, because they don't exist at all in the contemporary publishing landscape. So I thought maybe I can do what some of these great women writers are doing in Reading, and just actually think, what would Nevil Shute be writing if he was writing today, without the kind of problems that you sometimes get around writers from the 70s, mostly because around their male protagonists. So I thought, who are the male heroes that you can have today that actually fit today's world, and female heroes, but who could be adventurous? And what are today's adventures that take you to these places? Because this also came out of lockdown, when we were all shut in rooms. I know the first one was obviously a Caribbean, super yacht in the Caribbean, which is exactly where you want to be when you're shut in. But, So I kind of took that and it went from there. And so they're really like a really conscious effort to try and think, what is adventure in the modern world, which there isn't really a slot for on the shelves. There's thrillers and there are some adventures, but really interesting, there isn't a slot for adventure in that sort of way. I think it's really great, because actually Ruth Ware's now written 0 Days, which is actually adventure, and it's really great, and it's got it's kind of a romantic element as well. So she's ticked all the boxes. So maybe it will begin to break out there as a genre. But that was my kind of thing. I just wanted to do it for personal entertainment and see if it could be done, and see if there were new types of heroes you could have that still swashed their buckle, but without actually hitting people in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. And now that you speak about that, having read, wait a minute, let's hold it up. Having read The Conspirators, now it makes sense, understanding what you wanted to do and why things happened the way they did. You mentioned about some of the problematic issues of the writing in the 70s, and because of the way we view things now, that evolving. And so it's probably a really good point because I can't wait to get in and talk about this book. Thank you for the introduction. So your protagonist, Jacob Meany, and I really felt with him that you were presenting us with a male character that really represented the notion of the pressure that many men find themselves under to be the successful man, all that entails, and all that an individual might feel they need to do in order to meet those expectations, whether that be in the workplace, whether that be with regard to romance and relationships.
I love that. That's great. I mean, yes, hopefully so. I mean, that's brilliant. He does that very male thing. He's a translator and he loves language, and he does that very male thing.
Which William, I just have to say, I'm really sorry. I've got this thing that, it's like, given that language and translation and, is my professional world, as well as reading and translation. Again, your work ticks so many boxes. But anyway, back to you.
I think a lot of men who do something quite well but don't feel they can cocoon themselves in a bit of a world, and he's cocooned himself in the kind of love of language and translation, and that's fine. And it actually came from this friend of mine who's a very he is a guy called Marek Kohn, who writes quite academic books. He's not an academic book, and he wrote a book called 4 Words for Friend, and it was about the power of bilingualism. And at the time, sort of Brexity sort of time, the idea of him looking out to say, look, we only speak one language in this country. Maybe we should consider making sure we speak more than one language, because it does really extraordinary things neurologically and socially, and it changes our outlook on the world. And this guy understands that, but that's his only power. His only power is that he can read a poem in Portuguese and understand it like it's in his own language, or read it in Russian. He's very good. He just can absorb language. And I do meet some people who seem to find it a lot easier. And of course, we all do if we push ourselves. You know, as the point he makes in his book, if you live in Africa, it is nothing to speak 6 languages fluently, because that's what that society is.
Yeah.
You know, that's what a lot of people do. They speak at least 2 or 3 languages well, you know. Whereas we are, you know, we're not a very good society because we exported our language so successfully to the world. Anyway, that's his kind of thing, that he can do this, but everything else he's useless at. And so it's about him kind of growing into it and realizing that there is more than just his personal power in language. He can change the world around him because he's the only person in the room with this power. And he gets dragged into a he's absolutely broke. He's trying to impress his girlfriend. He gets a very high wage income for a translator, a ridiculously high wage income for a translator, actually, to be an interpreter. And he's not an interpreter. It's a very different skill, but he thinks, okay, I'm going to push myself and do this. Only he finds himself really people trafficked into this international conspiracy, which needs to speak Hindi, Russian, and Portuguese. And he happens to have those skills. And then he finds himself locked away in a mansion in Austria, at the heart of this thing. And the longer he's there, the longer he realizes things are not good and there's something very dark going on. But he also learns himself, and I love that. You see, the thing about adventure fiction is, in detective fiction, things kind of stay the same. We learn about the world we're in, but in adventure fiction, somebody learns about themselves. I figured this out writing 2 of them. And what he learns is that he has a power and he's got a responsibility to use that power and to actually put himself in more dangerous situations than he would feel comfortable, because otherwise other people will suffer. And he gradually learns that over the course of the book. And 2 languages is great, isn't it? Because you can see that as the reader, you can begin to understand the reader. You can give the reader an insight into what's being said in the room and see other people not understanding it. And I love that. It's a nice device.
Yeah. I found it, though, and I don't know whether this was your intention, but there was also, I felt, I mean, a very unlikely hero, and he grows in, and I was really struck by, you know, well, he's held captive in a way.
Yeah.
Well, he is held captive, but he grows in to that situation. You know, he finds, you know, resources within that. You know, it tests his mettle. I mean, I was sent back, you know, to the times of knights and conquests and things. You know,
I love that as a bloke, though. You see, I like good old-fashioned daring-do heroes. He doesn't have, well, he does hit people a bit in the end, but you know, mostly it's about using the words.
Yeah, and again, the power of words and what words can do. But I, you know, again, what I wanted to talk about was a little bit of moral aspect to it. I don't know. I'm almost like, you know, be careful what you wish for.
Yes,
you know,
that's true.
And you know, and okay, you might feel you need to do something in order to be whoever, but is it worth the cost?
Yes. Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, you know, there's one character in there. I mean, you know, he does have actually a really horrible girlfriend to start with. I shouldn't say this because if you're reading it, you know, but he has that, and I've made her a bit of a bad character, and I'm always slightly anxious about making that sort of acquisitive thing, but maybe. But he's trying to live up to her expectations, and so he begins to not think too hard, and so he gets himself in a very, very bad situation.
But it's a cracking situation as well. It's really good. Austria, Carinthia, thinks that, so again, I always like to know, because authors make constant choices. You know, there's nothing that happens by chance, and everything's weighed and balanced. So you could have sent Jacob anywhere in the world to be part of this adventure. Why Austria?
It was a decision I made quite early on, because I was looking for my baddie, and there is definitely one person, I have to be very careful what I say here, who fits the bill of this baddie, who is in Austria. He's somebody rather who's not quite as bad as my baddie, but is wanted, and if he leaves Austria, he will be in trouble. And so, you know, I think it's that difference between European laws and difference between how people regard it means that certain people can get into one place and actually feel a bit safer than they might. So I chose it simply because I'd seen I was trying to find a biography of a real person who might inform me about my baddie, and I found somebody other who kind of fitted in there, and they were actually living somewhere in Austria, but I have to be very careful because
Yes, you
they're
must.
actually a businessman
Yes, and still alive, presumably. Yeah.
and still, respected in many quarters. And so I'm not taking his life at all. I'm just,
Yeah.
I just use
Just
that
an
situation thinking
inspiration.
some of
Yeah.
the laws that keep him there could
Yeah.
keep this other person there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. When we start the book, there's a beautiful it starts with a quote from a traditional Indian poem, if I may read that. It says, "The cloth says to the weaver, 'Do not weave me, for tomorrow or the day after, I will be your shroud.'" And I
Yes.
wondered, where did you come across that? And again, maybe we should just talk to me about where you found it, rather
I
than
originally
how
found
it
it
plays out in the book.
in a book, and it's a children's book called, I think, Voices or something like that, which was distributed in schools in the 1960s. And so I went back and I tried to find various versions of the original poem, because it comes back in the book, and it's a lovely concept, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's just like we all have the seeds of our own destruction written in what we do. And which is exactly what you said about Jacob. Be very cautious about what you do because it will come and bite your arse.
Yeah.
Said more beautifully in the poem.
Of course, of course, but exactly holding those.
And I love it when you find an epigram that actually fits, because it's quite rare and you
Yeah.
can't do it very often, because like occasionally I've tried to find one and tried to shoehorn things into the book. And I think I've managed to get 2 epigrams that actually work in my whole career as a writer. And that one worked, and it worked because it was this traditional poem, so I could use it, so I could get it translate. I could get versions of it that weren't in the public, were in the public domain, but B, also I could then find, because he translates it later on. And I just wanted to nudge so I like that thing. It's very fancy, isn't it? But I wanted to bring the reader back to why it had been there.
Yeah, and I think that's why do we find things? Why do certain things come across our paths? Whether that be music, a film, a book, a poem. Why do we get to know these things? And I'm thinking, especially, people, in the creative industries like yourself, that then things begin to feed in, and it's almost like, there's voices out there saying, William, hello, I'm over here. I know what you're thinking of. Can you?
It's such a great to actually have somewhere you can put these things, though, isn't it? I mean, I think that's the real thing. It's like we all keep notebooks and things like that, and very occasionally some of the things we jot down come back to us, and it's great.
Yeah,
it's lovely.
And I think for the readers, it's that thing of, oh, so what is that? And those of us that are curious, it's like, oh, and now I'll go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
and so
I love those things where little things, and it's just like a tiny little, it's a miniature Easter egg, really. But just those things that actually, I love books that do that.
Yeah. It felt that it was a book very much written with not just, I want to tell a cracking thriller story, but I have an eye on things that are happening in the world and things that concern me. And one of them, of course, is if we can talk about Vlada, the character of Vlada. So a trafficked, I don't know. Well, she made a domestic worker. How would you?
Yeah, she's people trafficked. I think actually, effectively, Jacob's people trafficked, but she's the more conventional people trafficking in this way that rich people often have people who they could pay, but they don't. A lot of these workers working for virtually nothing. They take their passports and they keep them. And obviously, we had a huge displacement of people at the start of the Ukrainian war, and there's a worry that a lot of those people were people trafficked, and reading the stuff around there, nobody knows. I mean, it's really hard when war happens to keep an eye on people. So I imagined her as one of those people, and obviously every community in Europe now has refugee Ukrainians with them. So I spoke to there's actually a woman called Vlada, who kind of inspired that character who has to do fairly heroic stuff, but they're miserable because they're not at home and they're fearing for their parents or their loved ones and she's in a particularly dark situation anyway. And it was quite a late addition to the book, that, because I've really struggled with this book. I've never had a book which has been so hard to write. And then right in my really last draft, she just appeared because she'd been there as a sulky presence in the book, as you would be if you're there and you're not told actually this, because if you visit the house of a billionaire, which I do regularly, obviously, and that someone serves you like that, they would not be a happy person. So I started with that, and then later, right at the end, I was thinking there's something missing from this book. And then she suddenly came to life, but only in this little. She comes to life in a very behind. You don't really know her until the end of the book, and I really that was fun. But she was the spark that I think brought the actual whole book alive. That last draft, because I really struggled with this book, and then she appears there, and you don't need very much of that sort of presence, but actually start to explain it to think, oh my God, there's something really tragic that goes on in these situations.
I really appreciate, that you're sharing about that, because I think anybody watching or listening who is wrangling a book, to hear that, you never know when the last piece falls into place.
Absolutely.
And everything then, it's almost like, don't give up on a book becoming, simply because it's not seeming to hang together yet, because you never know.
You're so absolutely right. It's so completely right. That happened with a book called Michael the Birdwatcher, and it wasn't until the very end of like the second draft when suddenly I thought, this is what it's about, and all the pieces began to move into put in different places and things like that, and the whole thing suddenly makes sense. And that this book I actually wrote, I wrote a completely different book to start with. This plot was half the book, and there was another completely different plot, and I handed it into my editor, and he's a brilliant editor. But by the time he came back, I knew that it should only be one plot, and he said, you know what, it should only be one plot, and we came to the same decision, and it was like, phew, it was a massive relief. On the other hand, I had to write another book, but do you know what I mean? It's like, it's never, I mean, some people actually do conceive books very successfully from the start, and they write what they conceive, and I'm not one of those people, and I would say probably 2/3 of writers aren't those people, and kudos to anybody who can conceive things in the abstract. But I think for a lot of us, they don't come to life until they're nearly formed, and then you begin to see all the pieces and the reasons why your characters do things, and to have a logic. And you just have to, the amount of trust I think you have to give yourself to say, this will make sense, I've written it for a reason, I don't know what the reason is, will begin to reveal itself. It sounds really mystical and things like that, but it's part, but a book is an extraordinary thing. You work for months and months and months and months on one thing. What other art form requires you to do such a bizarre creative process? If you're a painter, at least you get some idea within the first hour of what your canvas is going to be full of. If you're if you're a sculptor, maybe it's more going down to the stuff like that. But books, it's a ridiculous form.
And I think that sense of the wrangling that goes on, with this entity, and how, from your own experience, you said, how something starts off one way and then it totally shifts and changes. I wonder, because forgive me if I'm saying incorrectly, but this is my perception, you are so established as a writer. It's not something of, oh, I've just begun this and is it okay? No, we know that when we pick a book up by William Shaw or G.W. Shaw, this is somebody whose craft has been honed. Do you feel less anxious maybe now that if it's not happening, you know that it will happen because you've been through it so many different ways?
It's the only thing I've learned. It really is, but it's a really good learning, isn't it? Because your anxiety is different. You still get anxious. I mean, I have to say, it was hell writing The Conspiracy. It's one of the most unpleasant experiences. I don't think that ever has anything to do with what the outcome is. But you kind of know, if I just keep going away at this, something will emerge. And because you sometimes wonder what you do learn. I mean, but and it is like each book's still a mountain each time. But at least I know I can get to the top of the mountain. Do you know, like, I don't know if you walk or cycle and you get that thing where the first time you climb up a mountain, and the top keeps disappearing and seems to get further and further off. It feels like it's going to, never be there. And then the second time you got the same mountain, you know where the top is. And it's kind of that, where the top is. I don't climb many mountains, but I do cycle up hills and I know where the top is.
I was going to say, I'm neither a climber nor a cyclist, but I can liken it.
You like the metaphor?
I love it. I would say more like, like when you first go to a place, I'm just a little pedestrian here, and you're headed somewhere, and you're not sure, you can't seem to find it, and then the way back, once you found it, the way back, you think, this is so obvious. Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I like that. The idea of knowing, or I've climbed a mountain like this before. I might have a new mountain to climb, but I have the equipment, I have the wherewithal, and I have the patience. to
Yeah.
make it. If it's all right to bring up, because we don't need to talk about how, why, where, or how, but one of the aspect of this novel, the evil doers and the baddies that are around there, a little bit of organized crime, if we can call it that, I think, all based around the notion of a wonder fertility drug. What utter beautiful creativity to bring in, because we're used to arms trafficking and nuclear weapons and things like that in thrillers. But fertility drugs, why, William? Why this? Why light upon this and not some other?
I was thinking, it was actually a conversation with the writer Fiona Erskine, kind
Oh
of
yeah. Oh,
helped me with that.
wonderful Fiona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to think, what's the value in drugs? What are people desperate for? And of course, if we all know people who embark on the fertility path, they can end up spending a huge amounts of money. And if something appears to be the key to this, and your biological clock is ticking, you will take risks. And so it seemed like a really good way to extract that value. And it's based on the idea that you could invent a real drug. But real drugs can take 2, 3, 4 years to actually get through the process of legalization, of accreditation. But there are different countries doing it at different speeds. And this creates black markets. And so I created an imaginary black market in a fertility drug that appears to be, the answer to everybody's questions. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you tend to go for the darkest options, but actually that is quite dark, because people's hope has raised something extraordinary, and you're using their time, and if they don't have the time, then you're doing something very evil. But it's not it's not machine guns and helicopters type of evil. It's a different type of evil.
It's a different evil, and I think it's an evil that for many of us, we can identify with easier than if it's okay. Yeah, come on in, because I'll do a quick snip. Sorry, am I all right to yeah, thanks. It's great. So I'll snip, William, we'll be fine.
Okay.
We were talking about some drugs and yeah, that's this. Yeah, because I think the notion of arms smuggling, even how shall we say, drug smuggling like heroin, for many of us that it's quite a removed experience, whereas bringing it to something that may, I'm sure a number of readers and people listening to us, that idea of fertility, having children, being able to have children.
Hope.
Yes. Yeah.
But there was I looked at a real case where this thing going through Canada of it's actually an oncology cancer sort of treatment, colon cancer drug that was proving really good, and somebody did this scam. And what really struck me is, like, it was only operating for a very short time, and the FBI confiscated something like £93 million from them, and it had only been operating a few weeks. And you realise how much money comes in when people have hope,
Yeah. And how we hope for these things. Yeah. So I wonder if you could tell me, because there's certain things I'd like to ask you while I find my pages. If there were anything that you would like us as readers to take away from this, you can leave us with one thing. I know there'll be many things each as we read it will take away, but is there an underlying message or aspect to your novel that you hope we retain?
I was discussing this with Tim Weaver actually the other day about how you write men now, because Tim Weaver does it really well in his books. I don't know if you're all his Missing series, because Tim Weaver's hero is not into tech. He catches public transport everywhere, and he's just got a bit of a hole inside of him because of something that happened to him earlier, and so he has to do all this stuff. And I really like the invention of new types of men, and so I think it's about that. It's like, and the Dead Rich was a similar sort of thing. It's like, how can men be a bit better, sort of thing. So I like that. And I guess that, again, the thing about language, are just like, it's quite good learning languages, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, it's my job. Honestly, for me, that sense of what it opens up around cultures, that understanding of one another, but also, being able to experience something in a different way because it's spoken about in a different way.
I put in an example in this book about this. It's the group in Australia, the First Nation group who we got the word kangaroo from, and how in language they don't have the words left and right. They just have a cardinal compass, and it's partly this: if you're living in a scarce place, you have to have a really good sense of place you are. So it's hardwired into their language that instead of saying left or right, you say north, south, east, or west, or their equivalents of cardinal directions. So it's baffling to us, because if you're watching a TV and a car goes across the screen in one direction, you say it's from going left to right, but they'll say it's going from north to south. But then you tell them to turn the TV around and watch from the other way, say, oh, the car went from south to north, because they're living in this absolute world of direction. But that means that if any of them's lost, they can explain to each other exactly where somebody is. And I love that thing. Is you talked about entering the world. And in some ways, language is relative. We can, but otherwise it's quite absolute. You can understand the people's world through the language, can't you? And I thought that's just a bit eye-opening for me, who struggles with A-level French.
But I think the struggling is what it's all about. I know I have people who say, I can't do this, but we've all learned to communicate to one degree or another in our own language. So we have the capacity.
We absolutely do.
Yeah. And I think it's that sense for me of, and I love that about Jacob, that the being able to understand others, when maybe those around you can't, and you can make connections. Now I know for Jacob that's a very dangerous situation that he's in making connections and the messages he's trying to convey or not convey, depending on the interlocutors in that. But I think,
and he actually hides a code in a language, which is quite nice, which is a very simple way to do it. But actually, I love the fact that it's blindingly obvious to somebody from who speaks another language what's going on, but completely invisible if you don't into the world of language.
Yeah. So here we are talking about that, but I've got a quote. It's from in chapter 23, and it says the Italians have a saying, traduttore traditore. Yeah. So translator, traitor.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's coming at a totally negative, idea from what we've been talking about. And it says people don't trust people who speak foreign languages. They live in too many different worlds. An interpreter was a kind of conspirator, neither one side nor the other.
It's about that liminality, isn't it?
Yes.
One is we get so chauvinistic and get so irritated by somebody speaking another language on our buses is because it's sort of out of place, isn't it? We've got a very sense
talking about
what they talk about, why they're saying it in our place. And actually that's what we all need to loosen up on, isn't it? We all need to have less of an idea of the boundaries of that, and just say, wow, there's somebody speaking another language on my bus. There was a person speaking a very, very loud West African language on my train coming back from bloody Scotland. And actually everybody's been really cool with it. But I was just thinking, I've been in situations where people get really keep your voice down, where they wouldn't have done if you're speaking in Geordie or something, do you know?
Yeah. Or when people, people say, you're in England, you should speak English. And it's like, okay, I find locally, yeah, but we're in the world.
And also, England's been in every country in the world. Let's face it. It's fine if people come back here and speak their languages, because when English people go abroad, they speak English.
Do you know Stanley Tucci?
Yeah.
And how he's now working so much in food.
Yeah.
And he was on a morning show in the States this week, talking about food and national identity, and how, of course, he lives in Britain now as well with his wife. Yeah. So the sense of he's realized that because we went out, part of the British Empire, and we plundered the foodstuffs in a way, if you will, and brought those foodstuffs back, that is why typical British high street menus has all that diversity, whereas it's very different when you go to the places that were plundered, as it were, and the those diets, typical menus, typical foodstuffs. It's not the same. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm.
Definitely. It's that thing
Yeah,
that, it's a very good state to realize we have a diverse culture in England, and it's the I am here because you were there.
yeah.
Um, which is a great
It,
quote, you
it
know.
is. I love it, and I'm really glad of it. I love that sense of what people bring to us when
Yeah.
all that melding together, that melting pot.
Our history is quite an interesting and awkward one, but we can make something fantastic of it.
You bet we can. You bet we can. My next little point I'd like to raise is, I don't know if, because it's here in the
Yeah.
darkness. I have a wee little foxy here,
Oh yeah.
and so there's David says he got
Oh,
up, yeah, and he stared out of the window. Lit by the glare from Draper's room, the fox, beautiful and slender, emerged from the back of the garden's utility shed. Halfway across the lawn, it stopped, as if it knew it was being watched. It glanced up at Jacob's window. The white fur under its muzzle seemed to glow in the dark. Jacob could have sworn it was looking straight at him. Again, a fox. Are you fond of foxes?
I love a bit of wildlife. I do like life
Mhm.
in the books, but that was a scene that I just wrote because this is a really good example. I just, this guy feels uncomfortable in his place, and everything's hostile to him as he sees it, even the fox that comes in
Mhm.
there. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? He's being observed
Yes. Yeah. The fox has
everywhere.
got. Yeah.
And then, you write that, and then you get to the end of the book and think, oh, there's something else I could do with that fox. And I quite like the fact if you do put stuff in randomly just to do sort of things like that, there's actually stuff so the fox actually comes back, and it has a bit of a use in the plot. But I do like a bit of local wildlife coming in.
Yeah. Thank you. Because again, recently I've been thinking all about foxes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Every now and again, I don't know. Before that, it was stags.
Right.
And I'm very fond of deer and things, but the fox, and there's been badgers as well that have inhabited my head, making me
Well, you see,
think
I
about
wrote a
things.
book in which I'm the only crime writer ever to have written a book in which a badger is a protagonist.
What is the
Um,
title of that book?
it's called Gravesend,
Gravesend.
and there is a talking badger in it, which I interviewed the world expert on badgers who lived in Lewis, and the first thing he said to me, please don't have it from a badger's point of view. I was like, sorry, mate, it's done.
So, and why not? I mean, seriously, why not? Why not be able to write from those different points of view? I'm aware of the time, and as ever, I know people have lots to do. And again, thank you for spending this time with us. Um, where where are you at the moment with regard to your writing?
So I've just dusted down, well, not, I've dotted the I's and crosses the T's rather than dotted down the next Cupidity book, which is a book called The Wild Swimmers. That's the series I write set in Kent, and it's a detective series. And that's very much to do with that landscape as opposed to the sort of glamour. It's more, and the landscape is about, obviously coastal communities. So I was fascinated by this total obsession we have with wild swimming. And so I had actually spoken to somebody or other on social media who lives in the town of Hythe, which is a bit posher than most of that coast, and a bit, as this woman kind of believes, up itself. She said, "Can you kill somebody in Hythe for me?" So it's delivering. I'm
Have you
delivering.
obliged? Yeah,
I have
yeah.
obliged.
You have obliged.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know that book is to come and wonderful, because I know many of us are so fond of that detective. And I think for those of us who don't inhabit that part of the world, again, you take us there, and you feel like you're walking, those spaces. I presume. I mean, like, do you think you'll ever be done with that space? Are you, it's an awful thing to say, but I just wonder, when do authors get to a point of, I think I'm done with this now?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I
Yeah,
think, but I think you have to sort of assume that you won't write it if it doesn't work anymore. But if it carries on working, I'll keep on writing it. I don't think you should carry on. I mean, there's been various writers who've found it hard to escape that kind of legacy. I really admire Ellie Griffiths for stopping her Norfolk novels because she was done with them. Now her readers aren't, but she was, and I
he
think that's a
was.
really
That's,
honest
yeah,
thing to do.
yeah.
Because not she's done with it, she'll come back to them, but she can't do another one. And I think that's, there should always come a point when you get to that, if it's the point, rather than just doing it, because it's only good if it's fun. It's not the highest paid job in the world, writing books.
Yeah.
So you should only do it if you're enjoying what you're doing. And I think it does shine through that you can tell when writers really enjoying themselves.
I think I totally agree. As comes out in here, it rolls on a pace, and it's fun, and it's scary, and it has those, and it asks those questions. And I've got a last question for you. And I have to do it like this because I don't want you to choose between your characters. So I'll ask my question this way. You have to go on a long journey, and you have to take Jacob with you. Okay. Where would you go with him, and why? Okay, you have to be away for at least 2 months. On the road. Where would you go with him?
That's good. So his main languages are Russian, Hindi, and Portuguese. And so, I'd love to go to India. I'd love to go to Russia with him because he'd give it such an understanding. But actually, I'd think I'd go to Brazil with him. I think Brazil is one of those countries where there's a lot of layers that I don't really know. I lived there when I was like 0 years old. I left when I was about 3 or 4, and I apparently could speak Portuguese when I was a child. I don't speak it at all now. But I'd like to give a really good guide to go back there. And it's also a very beautiful sounding language, Brazilian Portuguese. It's all shushes and stuff like that. And,
it's so very,
it's very different from European Portuguese, but it's in the sound. But it's he'd make a great guide to that, I think. And he needs to get out a bit more, does Jacob?
I love that. I love the fact that you would take him to a place where linguistically he would feel comfortable. But you might take him somewhere out of his comfort zone again.
I think I'd need to suggest the places we go, and he'd have to follow me. Yeah,
I like that. Yeah,
help me.
yeah. I know it's out in hardback. It came out in hardback in July. Do we have the paperback?
February something.
Yeah.
Was out in paperback. Yeah.
Great. Because I know we all like to enjoy our crime and thriller mystery fiction in different formats.
Yeah.
And I think
hardbacks are heavy.
Yeah, they are, but sometimes they touch the spot. It's really weird. I think books do different things, and then of course talking about ebook or audio, because at the moment it's available on ebook and audio. And I have to say, often I listen to, when I'm interviewing an author, often I listen to the audiobook because I do long car journeys. And I haven't listened to this on audio, but I think it's going to be one that, when I go down to my parents in Wales,
because it's really brilliant, because both these books have required somebody or other to speak in lots of different accents. And apparently he's genius at that. But she is, sorry, it's a woman. Who's really genius at that. That was a bit of a tricky ask.
So I think
funny.
So I'm going to go for that. I think my Christmas journey down to Wales to my parents will be to listen to this, because I know I'll see, because of the audio, I'll see different things than what I saw when I read.
That's lovely.
Yeah. So The Conspirators, with the strapline, when the price of life is death. William, it's been so tremendous. I could do. I hope you feel the same. But absolutely. I could talk for hours with you, because the way you explore things in your book, your focus, it's always interesting. I hope we get to see each other soon again. We only saw the back of each other's heads. Bloody Scotland, a fine back of head that it is. But until the next time, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, man. See you soon.